You're watching Canadian Muslim News on Muslim Network TV. From Toronto, Ontario, I'm Katherine Bullock. Welcome to the show. Assalamu alaikum and greetings of peace. Today we will be talking to Memona Hossain. She teaches something called ecopsychology at Emmanuel College upcoming. And we're going to talk to her about how the political campaign addressed the issue of climate change and what to expect from the new parliament. First, some news headlines. 140 unvaccinated hospital staff were sent home on unpaid leave. In Windsor, Ontario, 140 staff members were given unpaid leave because they failed to have their first vaccination dose before the deadline. Those staff members will have until October 7 to get their first shot, after which their jobs will be terminated or benefits suspended. According to the hospital's CEO, the policy prioritizes the safety of patients, the community, and team members. Vancouver has the highest tenant eviction rate across Canada. According to a new report by University of British Columbia academics, Vancouver has the highest rate of tenant evictions amongst major Canadian cities. Almost 11% of tenants have been evicted in the past 5 years. In Manitoba, Quebec, and Nunavut, however, less than 4% of tenants were evicted over the same period. Silas Zuabam, a postgraduate economics student at University of British Columbia, said that tenants who were evicted have reported low levels of mental health and life satisfaction. Thousands of Haitian asylum seekers are being expelled from the US border despite terrible conditions. Thousands of Haitian migrants are gathered on the banks of the Rio Grande River. Part of the Rio Grande forms the US-Mexico border. They are in hopes of seeking asylum in the United States. With ongoing deportation flights, President Biden has been pressured to stop sending asylum seekers back to Haiti. In Del Rio, Texas, asylum seekers with small children and babies are fashioning shelters out of reeds for protection from the sun. They set up camp by hanging their clothes and are hydrating using water from the river. But food scarcity and access to toilets remains the most pressing issue. The US Department of Homeland Security said that deportation flights will continue. Filippo Grandi, head of the United Nations Refugee Agency, said that these deportation flights might violate international law. Quebecers in shock after father and 2 children found dead. A father and his 2 children are found dead at an Alma, Quebec home. Gatineau police officers are investigating the suspicious deaths. The bodies of a 51-year-old man and 2 children, ages 3 and 5, were found inside the home. Investigators are treating the deaths as suspicious as the investigation gets underway. A police spokesperson said the most probable hypothesis is one of family drama. That's it for the news. And now an interview with Maimon Hossain on climate change and the new parliament. With me now, Memona Hossain, who is a nature educator and researcher, to talk about climate change and the new parliament. Memona teaches ecopsychology at Emmanuel College. Welcome to the show. Assalamu alaikum.
Walaikum assalam. Thank you so much for having me here. Bismillahir Rahmanir Rahim.
So I mentioned you're teaching something called ecopsychology, and we're all very curious to know what that means. So how about giving us a quick overview?
Sure, thank you. So first of all, I do want to start by recognizing that I am on the treaty lands of the Mississaugas of the Credit today as I speak, and I'm grateful for you to invite me in sharing my thoughts. So in terms of what ecopsychology is, it is a term that maybe we're not necessarily used to or have come across, and it really just reflects the interconnective and holistic relationship that humans and the earth have, and so that's something that I explore in terms of really the personal connections and relationships and how that impacts our thoughts, our behaviors, and how we perceive the earth.
So do you think that the politicians in the in the campaign that we've just had exhibit this kind of ecopsychology, this kind of personal relationship to nature and the earth?
Yeah, that's a good question. I mean, it's hard for me to know, but what I would like to see more of is that that explored as our leadership takes action. And so we've seen a lot of policies, or even promises of policies and targets around greenhouse gas emissions, as well as carbon taxing. And we've been hearing this from all of our potential leaders and the platforms over this past few weeks as we've led up to the elections. But what we've really been missing is an expressive element of this eco-psychology. And so, you can talk about laws, you can talk about taxing, you can talk about rebates and all of these and incentives, but at the base of at least eco-psychology is that this sense of stewardship and this sense of really caring for the earth and making meaningful change is really that we actually feel connected to it, and we're driven by this internal kind of drive to a change. And from our leadership's perspective, I think that really has to do with what kind of meaningful changes are they going to be making around education. And driving this through, whether it's our school curriculum, whether it's through community engagement. Also, this is deeply connected with the reconciliation work that we're talking about with Indigenous communities. So when we talk about, reconciling with our Indigenous peoples of Turtle Island, there is so much wisdom within their framework of understanding in terms of connecting and supporting life, and so that's another thing. And looking at other frameworks of connecting with the earth, we know that Canada is so diverse, and we can look at science, and we can look at politics, and we can look at economy in terms of addressing the climate change crisis that we're facing. But what does it mean to really, as a leader, look at driving and guiding Canadians to connecting with the earth, and how do we see that incentivizing that, whether it's through, again, our schools, our colleges, our universities, our community groups? Are we seeing our leaders engage in active dialogue in looking at different frameworks of even addressing these issues?
So you mentioned a lot of things there that are very interesting for follow-up questions.
Sure.
Tell us a little bit about then, what do you think are the most important climate change issues that you think the leadership should be addressing?
Yeah, for sure. So definitely the first thing is that we're seeing a drastic change in the Earth's surface temperature. And this has been discussed at the Paris Accords. We've been hearing this at the recent IPCC, so the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change, which is a group of international representatives really talking about how to address climate change. And so we're really hearing that this is almost becoming an existential crisis that we're dealing with, right? Loss of species, clean air, fresh water. But then there's also another part to this, which is the impact that it's even having on us as humans. We're realizing, and that IPCC report itself tells us that by 2050, which is not too far away from now, if you really think about it, we are expecting over 200 million climate refugees. And what that means is that we are looking at people that will be displaced because of environmentally related issues. So you can think about flooding, you can think about chemical impacts, all of these things. And that number actually is well on its way to exceeding any other form of refugees. So whether that's internal displacement or conflict-related refugees. So that is something that is directly going to impact us. We're also seeing the Imperial College in London just recently released a study suggesting that, not suggesting, but finding that mental health is actually also another huge impact on that we're going to be facing. So people actually even struggling to navigate these realities. For years, we knew, for example, that the Amazon basin was collecting and was a space that carbon could be absorbed. And just this year, we're now learning that it's actually emitting, because of fires and all of these things, emitting more carbon dioxide than it's absorbing. So what does this look like? So people are really dealing with these issues in Canada alone. I think this is a reality for all of us. We've been watching the wildfires. We've been experiencing displacement just here in Northern Ontario, on the brink of Eid al-Adha, when we were celebrating here in Ontario. We could smell and we could feel the haze, and that was out of the fires that was coming out in Northern Ontario. And so people can see this, and this is becoming more and more a reality. And so people are scared. People are worried. This is driving climate anxiety. So that's another impact that we're seeing. We're also seeing the youth who are really standing up, and we see the climate justice strikes that are happening across the world, really, and that youth really feel that this is something that they need to take into their hands. So these are some of the real issues that we're dealing with globally, and in
So
Canada, and Canada is no different.
I mean, I mean, those are some phenomenal figures and some really drastic changes in the earth that you've just highlighted for us. Tell us then how you think the federal government, the newly elected federal government, is going to tackle this. What do you see on their agenda?
Yeah. So, I mean, one thing that was really interesting is because of this backdrop of what I just shared, leading up to the elections this year, the climate change was a real issue on voters' minds. And that's new and that's different, right? And so, for the first time, even in the federal debates, you had not, and this was what was happening before, you had not a debate about whether climate change was an actual issue, but how our leaders would our potential leaders would address the issue. So that was from the beginning, that was something different that we were going in. And then we were also going in again at the brink of exactly when Canadians this summer have experienced so many drastic climate change related impacts. So it was very hot on their minds, and they were looking for answers. Now, whether our party's answer to those is up for another debate. But they definitely did have some points to suggest. So we had the Liberals coming in with the plan that they've presented earlier this year and looking to kind of further that plan. So we heard about their plans around cutting greenhouse gas emissions. We heard about their carbon taxing. And then we also heard about new rules and regulations that they're looking to stipulate should they be elected in, which they have been elected in. So we'll get back to that in a minute. But then we also had the NDP. And the NDP came in with a pretty aggressive goal for 50% reduction. We had the Liberals coming in saying they would aim to reduce by 40 to 45% by 2030. And then we had the NDP saying 50%, and then the Green Party saying 60%. What was interesting was that the Bloc Québécois, they did somewhere in a survey say they had a percentage, but in their formal platform, we didn't see anything. And then the People's Party of Canada actually did not present a plan at all on reducing. And so that's one thing. So you had these emissions. Now, if you look at the Paris Accord, within the Paris Accord, the numbers, at least to what Canada is committing to, they would need to have a 40 to 45% reduction plan to meet their goals. So Liberals are aiming with that. NDPs are a little more ambitious, and Green Party even more so. Now with this, what you have to also look at is not just saying numbers. We need to really look at the viability of these plans, and and the sincerity to actually address these plans. Because what we also know is that during the Liberal Justin Trudeau's leadership over these past few years, we've actually increased carbon emissions by 1% since 2015. So coming in with numbers and promises is one thing, but then being able to deliver is another thing. What we're also not seeing by any of our parties really is looking at how you're going to manage the logging industry, which is a huge industry in Canada. And we know that the millions of tons of carbon emissions that are being emitted through our logging industry, whether that's burning of scraps and whatnot, it's not. So we cannot comfort ourselves by thinking that the plan to plant trees and active forests, they are actually not replenishing at the same rate. So we are far exceeding our emissions, and we're not replenishing the absorption of carbon dioxide with our tree planting goals that Justin Trudeau.
Sorry to cut you off there.
No.
We're kind of run out of time, but you've covered a lot. There's obviously a lot there. We don't have time to delve into it, but lots more to explore on future episodes. So we thank you for raising the issues with us, with giving us that very broad overview, telling us what are all the main things that we should be looking out for, and keeping the government accountable, not just for their plans, their promises, as you said, but for their actions.
Yes, definitely. And looking at the other impacts that we're having. So how will you mitigate climate refugees? You're looking at potentially having rebates and all these things for people that will change or retrofit their homes. But then what about the fact that we now have people that are making greater claims for home damage because of climate change related, floods and whatnot. So there has to be a balanced aspect to these plans. And we're really looking for this in our leadership.
Thank you very much for joining us on the show. Memona Hossain, nature researcher and educator.
Thank you. Assalamu alaikum.
Walaikum assalam. That's it from us for now. Look forward to the next episode. You've been watching Canadian Muslim News on Muslim Network TV. Stay safe and God bless.